and welcome to this special presentation titled The 3 Best Ways to Go Cherry Picking for Big Winners. My name is Steve Chappell, the Director of Trading Systems Development here at VectorVest, and I'm delighted to be your coach for this presentation. And so, let's just get right to it. Let's talk about the first best way. And so, guys, I've been around VectorVest, of course, a long time, going on almost to the 19th year mark at this stage. And one of the things I learned real early on from Dr. DeLito was the thing that really drives price in the stock market is earnings. And not so much what the face value earnings is today, but where is earnings headed in the future? And so with the VectorVest simple technique, in terms of what are we trying to find, what are we going to be after, we're going to be looking for stocks that have smooth, steady rising price and smooth, steady rising forecasted earnings patterns. And that is really where you can hit some mammoth home runs over the long term. So let me show you a picture of what we're talking about. So here I am in VectorVest. I'm going to go right up to the Graphs tab, and I've loaded 3 picture-perfect graphs for our 3 different subjects today. We're going to kick things off, as I mentioned, with NVIDIA. And one of the things that might strike you immediately is look how smooth and steady that price pattern is moving up the graph from the March lows. The next thing that might strike you is here's a stock that was trading around $200 and is currently trading north of $500 even today on what has been a kind of a soft day in the stock market, right? So how is able to climb so far, so fast with price action? Well, if we look to the bottom graphic, this is our EPS, earnings per share in VectorVest, and it's extremely important. In fact, this is an indicator that for the long-term type of investor, you really want to make paramount one of the key ingredients when you're cherry picking for some big winners. And so look at that tremendous run in the forecasted number here. So let's talk about earnings per share a bit, because VectorVest does do it a bit different than anything else you're going to see out there. Now, we do, of course, take into account a trailing 12, but we also look at the consensus analyst estimates for both the end of this year and the end of next year. And we take all of that data, extrapolate it into just a simple 1-year calendar lead, 12-month calendar lead. So the important message then is this, for every data point that you see marching across this graph, is letting you know that earnings is climbing a year from then for each and every one of those data points, meaning earnings is smoothly and consistently rising on a forecasted basis. And friends, the biggest message is that's what leads to the smooth, steady price pattern. The correlation there is one to never overlook. It is the single most important correlation in the stock market for long-term big winner cherry picking. And I can assure you that because I've been teaching this for the 19 years and I've seen it myself, So the main question then I think would become, if I were you, how do I find it? It's great that you can show me a graph and, produce it here. And thanks a lot, because this looks like a terrific pick even now, and it is. But how can I find that on a consistent basis for myself? Okay, so I'm going to show you a great way, and I'm also going to show you a great list to be utilizing this technique on right now, and that's going to be 5G. Because, ladies and gentlemen, I think we all know it, that is the future, right? And so let me show you how you could have even found NVIDIA here very easily as of late. Okay, so I'm going to go to Viewers. From the Viewers tab, I'm going to go to Watch List Viewer. From Watch List Viewer, I'm going to go to Overview Watch List and 5G. It was well over a year ago that our founder, Dr. Bart DeLito, had a great write-up on the 5G revolution. We've talked about it several times now in VectorVest University, of course, since that was produced. And this is a watch list to certainly just have in your daily rotation of, if I'm looking for stocks to buy, this ought to be a piece of it. So how can I find that long-term big winner like an NVIDIA and do it quick, right? Well, let's take a look at that, okay? So what I'm going to do, a couple things. First, I'm just going to change the sort. So I'm going to go right up here to the top, And VST is always a great place to start, don't get me wrong. But if we want smooth, steady rising price and smooth, steady rising earnings, we have two indicators that will get that job done. On the earnings side, it's going to be RS. So that would be a good place to start. High relative safety companies tend to have your smooth, predictable earnings patterns, right? You've learned that in things like the Successful Investor. So let me scroll to RS. And then another component that would give you the smooth sailing, smooth, steady price action is going to be CI. So we're going to use those two indicators in combination. This is a great sort in any viewer, whether it be stock viewer, here in the 5G, WOW watch list, anywhere you might travel. This is one to have in your arsenal of sorting to find great cherry picks for the long term, okay? So when I click that, lo and behold, look who goes right to the top of the list. So it's really that simple. And so we've got NVIDIA, Apple, AMD, Skyworks, Microsoft, Amazon, right here at the very top of the list. Okay, but there's going to be more and more stocks that you may not be quite as familiar with as you work your way down. And there are some dandies like a Corvo and a Sienna and a few others there to boot. Okay, so that is going to be one of your best ways to start isolating great long-term big winners. So let me just graph the top several here for you, and we'll show you what we mean. Here again is that simple chart of NVIDIA, and you can see, boy, beautiful and accelerating smooth, steady rising earnings. Great combination. As we look at Apple, very similar story here. There's always a little ebb and flow, you can see, to the indicators. So don't get too tied up in what's happening on the right-hand edge of the screen here. It is this rising forecasted earnings per share, ultimately, that's driving the rising price on Apple. Here again with AMD, similar story. Now we do see that the forecasted number has begun to slow down a bit. And what do we see with price of AMD? We see a bit of a slowdown there. However, it is still rising, so you might expect a little bit of rise in that stock price coming out of this consolidation. Okay. Here again, Skyworks, again, similar story. It's slowed down a bit here, right? So we see more of a channeling price action up there. Just like when it slowed down a bit here in the past, we saw some channeling price action on Skyworks. Microsoft. And here we go with Amazon. Now look, Amazon's starting to climb here again pretty aggressively. And of course, share price looks like it's poised for a potential breakout. Now with TCEHY, I'm not sure that we can call this smooth, steady rising price. So we would omit that one simply because that in and of itself doesn't qualify. Then, of course, the earnings is a bit erratic down there at the bottom as well. But look at Sienna. Yeah, so beautiful and still moving up the page pretty good with earnings. Might have a little opportunity here should the market find some footing again, like it has this whole upturn from the lows. We've had a couple of down days, and then before you know it, the market's hitting new highs again. You know, should that start to happen, should we move back to a primary up wave, Sienna would certainly be one that I would be looking at here myself. You know, with BABA, a little bit too erratic here, I would say, on the earnings, not really going anywhere, more kind of flat. So, and with T-Mobile, you know, maybe one to avoid here. And so that's the process, you know, just going through. And here again, this would be a good candidate, Lumentium Holdings. Beautiful rise in the forecasted earnings number and a more attractive stock price on the top chart, you know, leads to some opportunity there. Now, we'd prefer, obviously, to see a little bit smoother, steadier price action. But this does present an interesting opportunity in that earnings is climbing quite aggressively and price has yet to catch up. So that is opportunity, believe me. Okay. And, you know, you can just keep going down through the list and doing this analysis. And a lot of times, you know, we've had this COVID pandemic, obviously, but if you go back and look, you know, the smoother and steadier you can find, the better you're going to be. And so again, with a company like Sienna, that's a tremendous track record of earnings there. Amazon is really begun to pick up the pace here again, and Microsoft there as well. And so very quickly you can start to really separate the big winners from the ones that are likely not going to be as big. So that's my main message with technique number 1. Favor smooth, steady rising price, smooth, steady rising earnings patterns. Those will be big winners over the long term in a rising stock market. Let's go on to technique number 2. Technique number 2 is going to be utilize the Midas touch information in VectorVest. This is more high momentum. So instead of going after the long-term solutions, we're kind of going more after the medium-term solution, or kind of the swing trade, days to weeks, possibly months type of a scenario. So with Midas touch, it's a different technique altogether. And what we're after, the main message, is high momentum. So let me show you a graph of a good high momentum stock on a current basis. All right, so let me go over here again to graphs, and we'll go to PEIX. PEIX is Pacific Ethanol. And this thing started to get high momentum back in late July. So I'm going to draw your attention to 7/29/2020. Look what it's done since. More than doubled. In this case, in just a few weeks versus many months. So a different approach. How can we go about finding and getting into some big winners like a PEIX over just days to weeks instead of months to years? So we have a technique over on the right. What I'm going to do is quickly bring on the Midas touch. So this is a technique that we first started using on the gold market because gold is quite volatile. And what it does is it helps us ascertain the trend in a more volatile type situation. We prefer the 3-month chart. And when picking a winner, like we could have actually here on 7/29, we have a couple of more indicators on the chart now. On the bottom, we have a moving average of relative timing. That moving average is currently set to 40 days. That kind of smooths that timing out for us, right? And we want that to be hitting a 3-month high in order to qualify, which it was on this date. And then we want the 10 and moving average of stop, STOP, and the 65 to also be hitting new highs over the same 3-month period. And of course the 10 over the 65 byproduct of that, and so on and so forth. So this gives us more of a higher momentum lifting stock price action at the date when all of that will be achieved. And so the bet then is that high momentum, in more cases than not, should remain intact, right? Particularly if we do things to try to ensure success, like put out a buy stop order for the next day above the current day's high to try to make sure that as we step into a high momentum market, that market is actually continuing right away as we step in. So that's a very common tactic with these kinds of stocks, would be the buy stop order for the next day above the high of the current day. That way, if there's some wick on the current day, you want to get out and above all of that downside closing action. Okay, this would have been a clear-cut candidate with all those rules intact. So again, Steve, this is great. I can see that the high momentum can lead to further high momentum up and across the page, even with a bit of volatility that's expected, if it's going to double potentially in just a few short weeks. But how do I find it, right? So we have a great resource for you guys in VectorVest, and we just want to keep you abreast of these things. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to show you how to find it. Let's go to viewers. I'm going to go over here. I'm in watch list viewer here again, guys. We have a cherry picking folder at the top, and we're going to be using these next 2 lists as part of our discovery on great cherry picking tactics. So we're going to go to the Midas touch list here for tactic number 2. All right, so Midas touch, what I'm going to do is just take our date back a bit. We're going to go about a month, because remember, it's days to weeks. We're going to go to 7/29, same day that I had listed. And one of the attributes that's really nice when picking some of these big winners is good price action on the on the trigger day, on the day where you pull up the chart. You want, we prefer to see a nice tall bar with a strong close, those kinds of things. So sorting by percent price change is something we do quite often in a lot of the watch lists when we're looking for days to weeks trades on a daily basis. And I'm going to utilize it here because what it does, if I graph them up, actually, let me run the quick test for you here first, just to give you an idea. So there's some explosiveness in this list, guys, and in particular that PEIX, right? But also iClick and so on. This group of stocks is up 18% from the last primary wave up call to the current time, which has not been the best part of this run off the bottom, right? I mean, things have really slowed down significantly. Up 18, the market's only up 2.25 over the same time frame, so well outperforming market action, in particular the ones that blasted off. So one of the things I like to do is, what are the attributes of the big winners, right? And so let's graph them up. What are the attributes of the big winners? Let's take a look. So did you know you can graph right from the quick test? So I'll just right click, view the stock graphs. Let's go back to 729. All right, so here again was PEIX on 729. And one of the attributes I see is that nice acceleration of stock price coming into the day that we found it. And I do see good price action that I could have taken advantage of the following session with that buy stop order, right? Let's go to the next one here. This one, you could have actually stepped into the market the next day. It didn't finish well, but if we put the order a few cents above the high, it was $6.96 on the high price this day. It was $7.04 the next day. Wouldn't have felt like we were getting off to a great start there, but it is the right recipe. As long as the market's moving your way at time of execution, you're doing everything you can to try to make sure, that the stock's going to get off to a good start. There's always going to be a stock or two, and several for sure along the way that are going to give you some heartburn from time to time. Okay. Here again, this one with USX didn't really have the immediate entry, and that may have been a good thing because stock price didn't really start climbing higher for more than a week, and we could have reserved that capital for looking at another stock the next day. And hopefully that one gets off the ground and gets running. So hopefully you're beginning to see how all of this ties together, right? So clearly with the tactics that I covered, the one that we would have stepped into almost in isolation here would have been PEIX. Now there's a lot of stocks on the list. So, certainly there could have been some other great candidates further down the list there. But for time's sake, I'm trying to keep things on schedule here. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to tactic number 3. Tactic number 3 is going to be hot stocks. So guys, we put hot stocks out there all the time, and if you didn't know about it, now I'm going to try to make sure you do. And what we want with hot stocks is we want explosiveness. So if we think about the current market we're in, where it's getting more selective, the buy to sell ratio has been curling downward. All three of these tactics are going to be great in a market that's becoming more selective. Okay, this is going to pick things up even another notch. So we had the long-term smooth and steady. We had the medium-term, high momentum Midas touch, and now we're really looking for quick profits with things like hot stocks typically. Probably an emphasis on days, could potentially turn to weeks from time to time, but emphasis on days with hot stocks. Okay, so let's take a peek. When we talk about what we're after with hot stocks, we're after stocks like this little bugger here, GRWG. Anybody see that one over the course of the last week or so? Well, I know some people that should have. This was one of my hot stock panel picks in the YouTube hot stock picking panel on August the 10th, which was before it even officially blasted off. But got a little bit of luck on that. I knew earnings would be good. Probably didn't know they'd be as good as they were, But when we see this explosiveness, that's the main message here. This is what the hot stock picks that we put into VectorVest every night for you. That's what we're aiming for. This kind of performance. Realizing, that just a few of these, if we nail them, can really move the needle for our traders out there. Okay, so how do we go about finding a GRWG? Not before, but as it's blasting off, because you got to have some evidence to know that it's blasting off, right? So let's go over and take a peek. I'm going to go to the Viewers tab here again, and another great resource is going to be your hot stock picks. Okay, so on hot stock picks, oh man, what a great, and Digital Turbine, that's a name to remember. But let's go forward here. Let's go to just this last week. I just kind of want to hit that point home here. Just this last week, and here's Digital Turbine again. Still a hot stock a month later. So you got iClick, Sibanye, which has kind of been hot and not, kind of all over the place. Well, we'll get into that. Grow Generation, look at that. So while we couldn't have got in before the blast off, certainly still plenty of profit potential to be made. Let's take a look at some of the graphs here. All right, and so we're looking 817. This is just this past week. These are stocks you could have been on this past week, starting this past Monday. Okay, Digital Turbine. Look at that beautiful, beautiful price action there. Guys, they had a blowout earnings, and it's been on our radar. Now we don't need the Midas Touch layout anymore, so I'm just going to go to VectorVest layout here. The main message here is the explosiveness. We're looking for stocks that can really move over the short term for you, and Digital Turbine certainly does. Remember, always put that buy stop order out above the high. Try to make sure, because these are going to be really moving. So we want to try to make sure that we, jump on a rising equity that's continuing to rise. So we take the high here. The high would be 2607 on that day. And I'd put it a few cents to maybe 12.5 cents above that number. So, just use your own reason there. But let's just say 2612, at least. Did we get to 2612 the next day? You bet. And off she goes. All right. So let's look at the next one. Here's iClick. iClick, the high price on iClick was nice tall bar. This is a good ingredient. Nice tall, strong close. I get that it's at resistance for my technicians out there that might be thinking things, right? But if we put that order out above, right, we're kind of taking care of that situation. So this looks great. I mean, it's a potential, breakout. And it did, right? So if we put the order above the high here, the high was 854, just a few cents here. I mean, it's less than 10 bucks. So 859, did it get to 859 the next day? Yeah. I mean, it got to, the close was 927. So you're making money hand over fist already here. Now the market's begun to break down a little bit on us the last 3 days, and I think iClick is feeling some of those effects. Here's Sibanye. Sibanye is a situation where, depending on where you would have put that buy stop limit order, could have saved your bacon, the buy stop limit order. The other thing, though, I would quickly mention is let's take the performance from the end out, and I'll just leave it up to you. Does that look as good as the price action of the other two stocks so far coming into, so it's got some big jumps, some big gaps in both directions, and some big movement anyway in both directions. And, that's what you might get here in the short term after you make a purchase, because what you see is ultimately what you're going to get. So that's another big thing. When we talk about cherry picking, we want what looks like at least solidly upward moving price direction, not a whole bunch of awkward volatility. Okay. So this one was one that we might have passed simply on that, right? Here's Grow Generation. Grow Generation, there was certainly money to be filled and made the next day. And look what it did the next day after that. And then it started to break down, so we're out with a profitable trade, right? on a much lower open than the prior close. That's a huge warning sign. All right. So tremendous, that's something to be on the lookout for always, are these hot stock picks. Utilize that buy stop order. But remember, guys, all of this is secondary to primary trend of the market. So we got to go back to the home page here. Just want to hit that home. Couple of red lights showing. Buy to sell ratio is aggressively moving towards 1. And we have moved to a down up situation. Let's wait till we move at least back to the up before we try going after any of those principles, except for maybe the hot stocks list, because if things start turning bearish enough here, you're going to see contra ETFs and things like that in the list. In fact, let me go back to the viewers, and let me just go to the 20th here. This Friday, we'll kind of have the top picks for the week, but as early as Monday, I think you could possibly see some contra ETFs on the list here. So just kind of bear that in mind. Hot stocks is always a good place to look. Always a good place to look. All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video today. And if you apply those techniques and tactics we talked about on a current basis, they are time-tested, tried and true. And, you will be well served employing the tactics that we talked about in this video. I just want to thank you for coming out here again today. And as always, we'll see you right back here again next week with your next special presentation. And talk to you then.